Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is May 14, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Part two of Mark Stahlman. Mark, thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Wow, 2 Sundays in a row, I get to talk to the famous Jerry Fialka. I hope we have as much fun this week as we did last.
We had a lot of fun. It was 2 hours and 22 minutes. But, we decided at the end of part one that we would go into, well, what are we going to do about all this? And indeed, I'm going to still follow our script, and you put the questions into the context you want. But I thought I would start off with a funny little non sequitur that kind of follows with Marshall's complex clairvoyance or Frank Zappa's conceptual continuity. Today's Mother's Day. And, it's a line that I love in Jimi Hendrix, Up from the Skies. I want to know about the new Mother Earth. So there's no one better to tell me what is nature, Mother Earth, what is Mother, and what is the new Mother Earth. But that is funny because I love that you stressed last time that television retrieved the occult, according to Marshall McLuhan's tetrad, and that the word occult, etymologically, 1530s, means secret. It took 100 years before they added it or made it morph into meaning supernatural sciences, which is funny. So you got laws of media, the new science, you got the word supernatural, nature, the new Mother Earth. And then what are the supernatural sciences? Magic, alchemy, and astrology. So we get to alchemy. What I've learned is you take two known things, you put them together, tertium quid, and you get a third new thing. So it falls right into this next question because it's tell me someone within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model. And Mark, because you're so articulate and clear with your spoken word, and I'm grateful for that, I learned from people like Harold Bloom, Anxiety of Influence, that you absorb your influence and then you abandon them. Good luck. That is like, how do you abandon? But this is tertium quid. You don't want to be a McLuhan clone. You don't want to be a Norbert Wiener clone, but you want to take it farther. Like Martelko, you're standing on the shoulders of giants, but you want to look farther. So you got the basic question. Within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you. And what was that impact?
Well, the answer has to be my mother.
Yeah.
And the impact has to be the reason why I'm Catholic. Very straightforward. My mother's maiden name, maybe I shouldn't mention this because that sometimes winds up being a security question for financial transactions. But my mother was Irish.
Yeah.
And in particular, a category of Irish that you may be familiar with called Black Irish.
Okay.
And so it was from her Irish Catholic background, which is obviously the same as James Joyce, that I really became interested in these wider matters. I would not have gotten that from my father's influence. Not at all. So my mother's the one who took me to church and Sunday school, as a result of which I had my first encounter with the Jesuits at about the age of 12, which of course led to me picking arguments with the Jesuits. And my memory, you might expect, was that I didn't find them all that smart.
Now, just to be clear, is this you're being raised a Roman Catholic?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Sunday, going to church on Sunday, going to Sunday school and and reading the Baltimore Catechism.
So you're saying what you got from your mom was this need to be inquisitive and this dedication to Catholicism. But what you got from her was that and you can expound on that. Is it more the DNA from her DNA to your DNA, or more the way she raised you?
Well, I think it's both. I wound up with a genetics degree as an undergraduate, and so the nurture nature standard debate, I think, probably is mischaracterized in many ways. But the basic answer to the question, of course, is that I got both. And but the Irish part of me, genetically, it's fascinating. I don't know that we will ever figure this out, but I hate the Brits.
Wow. Yeah.
I can't figure out where that came from. I mean, other than the fact that they are really quite obnoxious. And I was amused by John Cleese's reaction to the coronation.
What'd he say?
He said he laughed his ass off. He said, what are these people doing? Wearing these silly costumes? He said, I thought it was a Monty Python skit. So, but we know that, or should know, that the British royalty is not ceremonial. We should know that the Order of the Garter and the Keeper, of the Mice, or whatever these various titles are, these are not meaningless, silly, ceremonial matters. They actually have some quite significant geopolitical implications.
Yeah.
You get invited, particularly to some of these higher exercises, and this is where a lot of very important deals are done, should we say.
Yeah.
But most importantly, I'm hoping your viewers are aware that the most important geopolitical force argument in the world today is not Davos. It's not Bilderberg, which doesn't really do much of anything anymore. But we can talk about McLuhan's trip to Bilderberg if you like. That was a fascinating May 1969 encounter between McLuhan and a whole stratum of people that he otherwise didn't deal with. But today's world, as we are reminded frequently, the part of the reason why newspapers and television aren't being trusted anymore, but only one of many reasons, is because they keep being fed all this intelligence material. And you try to trace that back. Most people in the US are happy to, land on CIA or something like that, but that's not the story. It hasn't been the story since the 1970s. There was a war in the US intelligence agencies, and CIA was actually the loser in that war. CIA was traditional. CIA was spies and crazy operations. But no, it turned out that that battle was won by the Brits. And so that relationship between American and British intelligence largely went to the Brits, and it's a technology over human beings preference. The Brits never had that many people. And they seem to me, at least, based on various accounts. There's a recently published book called The Legacy of Violence of the British Empire. I don't have the author's name immediately at hand, but the way that the British imperialism used people, particularly in organizing groups of people to fight and kill each other, so the Brits didn't have to bring in troops. They just organized the local situation so there would be a conflict and nobody would be strong enough to oppose them. So this is not a happy imperial past, but maybe most importantly, British intelligence, which is arguably the strongest, most powerful, influential, almost directing of the rest of the whole exercise, reports to the crown, not the parliament.
Yeah.
Remember, Britain doesn't have a constitution.
Yeah.
So these sorts of lines of authority, in many cases, they run straight into the monarchy to this day. You can be sure that Donald Trump did not want to meet with Queen Elizabeth so they could talk about corgis and tea. Donald Trump wanted to meet with Queen Elizabeth because she was the one trying to get him out of office. The whole jihad against Trump originates in British intelligence. And British intelligence is now run by King Charles.
King Charles, wow. Well, let's go in. We're going to delve into what you're talking about.
Reminding me of a famous memo to Prince Charles.
Yeah, there you go. But I wanted to go back because we're going to get into a lot of what you just talked about. You said your mom. Now, the second part of the question, someone outside your immediate family who had an impact on you. And what specifically was that impact?
Well, I think arguably and appropriate for this podcast, that would have to be Marshall McLuhan. I mean, I'm 75, so I was in college when McLuhan's works were first published. And I never thought I would wind up having a conversation with a McLuhan scholar like yourself about this. But it turns out that I took what I made at the time. I've subsequently learned so much more that it's probably quite naive on my part. But McLuhan was a very deliberate, outlying thinker. He had a lot of trouble, to be sure, and wound up trying to become famous to overcome some of those academic problems. He couldn't find people that he could work with because he was outside of the defined narrative. I mean, this is an English professor who's talking about television. But all of that was, I mean, McLuhan, as you know better than I, but as an undergraduate in Winnipeg, Manitoba, I've seen some materials where he was basically saying, I go to a history class and I don't believe what the guys are telling me. That's not history. That's not what happened. So he's arguing as an undergraduate against his professors who were telling the standard, Western civilization development story, and he didn't buy it.
Yeah.
So at a very early age, I suspect, Marshall was a serious outlier, and I think that's what I learned. I mean, the 60s, when I was first reading McLuhan, obviously everybody was revolting, including me. But most of that revolting was useless, just self-indulgence, naive, just childish, sort of ranting and raving. And dropping into the middle of that, so in that time of intense upheaval, Marshall McLuhan struck me as the guy. I don't remember anybody else that I read in that time period who could organize all this in a way that it became productive from the outside of what the normal narrative was.
Yeah. Mark, that's interesting because there's that great video clip of Easy Rider star Peter Fonda on, I think it's David Frost's TV show, and they bring out Marshall, and Peter's holding up Take Today, the executive as Dropout, going, read this, you know, to TV audience as Marshall comes out. Like that's a flipped out title for a book. And so we talked about flipping. Take Today, the executive as Dropout. But let's continue on, because see, in the midst, you do so well. You in the midst of these basic questions I ask everybody, you go into these amazing learning lessons. You know, I mean, believe me, I don't have a lot of viewers, but the people that do view this, a lot of them want to learn McLuhan deeper and not just the surface. And it's hard to get McLuhan. You know that. He's really misunderstood. So after the two role model questions, I usually ask, what religion were you raised? Did you ever check out? The basic question is, do you pray?
Yes, absolutely. You have to.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Welcome to the pearly gates.
I get welcome home, but not pearly gates often. Here we go, Mark. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Evil is actually personified in fallen angels. Exorcisms are real. Satan is real. But people are not the same as angels. And people are capable, every one of us is capable of doing evil, but I'm going to try to be theologically at least relatively precise here. Evil is not a positive thing. It is a lack of something positive.
Yeah.
It is a rejection of something positive. And that positive, in a fundamental sense, theological sense, is divine grace. And this rejection of grace is something that is quite common. We're surrounded by many people who are trying to save the world, for instance.
No.
That's a very serious problem. They generally make it worse.
Yeah, very good.
Worse, yeah.
I love what you're saying. Is it so resonates with me. Just to follow up on, normally 80% of people raised a particular religion, checked out between 12 and 18. Then they you know, say, I'm a spiritual person. I say, do you pray? A lot of them say they've checked out. That's fine. And then when I say, do you pray? They go, well, yeah, I still pray. Because it's like, oh, my car won't start. Or, you know, it's interesting how they keep that little prayer thing. Here's the real follow-up. And you handled that so well, because so many people do say in my interviews, evil people exist, or is it evil use them as a vehicle? They go, everyone's capable of evil. So I loved when you said that we are capable of doing evil, but it is a lack. How do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from The Mob and the Samurais, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. It's a lot of thoughts. Mark, the basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Alan Watts was a strange Buddhist.
Yeah.
Indeed, Americans who call themselves Buddhists are strange Buddhists.
Yeah.
Buddhism itself is a fascinating story, and I kind of double majored. I just mentioned genetics. My other half of my undergraduate major was Buddhist theology.
Wow.
And it's a giant mixed bag. And in particular, since Buddhism is a reform movement of Hinduism, in some respects, like Protestantism is a reform movement within the Catholic Church, there's a lot of baggage to deal with when you get to Buddhists. So Alan Watts, I think, because of many dimensions of the strangeness and the fact that he probably found himself in a rather combative situation. So the extent that Zen Buddhism, Alan's flavor, and American Zen Buddhism at that, which is not the same as Japanese Zen Buddhism. I don't know that Alan ever went to Japan and actually studied this, so he absorbed it and promoted it as he did. But he was in a sort of in a fight all the time as a result of this. So this is counterculture times. And he was a major proponent. So he would have gotten himself into so many fights that I'm not at all surprised at that answer. I don't argue with anybody.
Right. This is so smart. But that is great. You are so smart. You're really my hero. Okay, Mark, how would you advise, cut right to the chase? How you heard all these other guys like Kennedy going, don't forget their name. They're all cute quotes like Fellini, I need an enemy. But how do you
remember Kennedy is Irish mafia, so yeah. That's a mafia sort of version.
But how do you advise? How would you answer that? How do you advise someone to deal with an enemy?
Be as generous as you can and see if you can get them to open up to being generous to understanding your own contributions.
Wow. That is brilliant. So Nassim Taleb has an interesting quote because it's a follow-up to this. Games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who is a hero. I told someone this, and they said, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. Gregory Bateson says, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, oh, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, oh, I did something morally or socially wrong? Does punishment work?
Well, that's quite a list of
yeah, there's a lot of prompts. There's a lot of prompts there, so you can go wherever you want. But I'm
going to take the Bateson side of this discussion. And,
please.
In particular, Bateson was one of the key people who ruined the career of my godfather, Norbert Wiener. And Bateson, my reading of Bateson at least, I've attempted and not yet been successful to have a conversation with the Bateson people about this. I'm in contact with them. Nora Bateson is a sometimes email correspondent, and she has pledged that she will get together a discussion so we can dance around the campfire of this particular topic. But my interpretation of Gregory Bateson is that he really didn't like people, and he really wanted something different. He did not want human beings. He wanted something different. And so the Steps from Ecology of the Mind, his most famous collection probably, is a long description of how we might change people so they're not people anymore. He was an anthropologist studying people who didn't like people. And so this becomes a sort of difficult territory to work with from that standpoint. And it's far too common. We have been compelled by artificial humans. So this is what AI is. It's not artificial intelligence, because intelligence is not the characteristic of a human. If you think intelligence is what makes humans special, then you're going to be a sucker for all kinds of schemes, many of which will be disadvantageous to humans. So the most famous speech that Gregory Bateson gave was given in 1967 in London. In my judgment, he gave lots of speeches, so maybe there are more important ones, but this one was called Conscious Purpose versus Nature, as I recall. And that presentation, originally a speech, later an essay, got him a whole bunch of backing, and he got funding from this Rockefeller anthropology spinoff, Werner Gren, and he had conferences, and his daughter wrote a book about that. And so I think that conflict amongst those various that you've spoken about is the one that left the biggest mark on me.
But I talked to Nora Little once. She was at an MEA conference. I would love to interview her. She didn't respond to the interview request, but you know what? I would love to host that. Me, you, and her, and I sort of am, asking the questions for you. I find, Mark, what's most important in your communication is you say, I don't argue. That's what I tell my McLuhan group all the time. I said, we're not here to argue. I'm not against arguing somewhere else, but the time I'm hosting our gathering, let's not argue. And so I love that you said that. But the one thing you said is, I hate Brits. Is that more metaphorical or more literate? Because I wanted.
It was my answer to the genetic question. I said,
right.
Apart from the fact that they are generally assholes, and behind the scenes, they actually are sort of running the world. Apart from those details, I don't know why I hate the Brits.
Right. I'm not asking you.
Other than the fact, and this was part of my answer of the influence of my mother, genetic influence, is I'm Irish. Yeah. And I think if you're Irish, you have to hate the Brits.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a good reason why Joyce didn't go from Dublin to London.
Yeah.
He went to Paris.
Yep.
And
thank God.
The French hate the Brits.
Yeah. But I'm saying, like, name calling is another thing. That's metaphorical and literate. They're assholes. Okay, now I'm from this world of Lenny Bruce and Frank Zappa, and they're potty mouths, and they like to call people names. And in the big picture, name calling doesn't really work, but it gets it out of your system, and it's not maybe as literate as some people think. But the word hate is back to my thing. Is hating, because we're talking about evil than enemies, is hating more innate or more invented? Is it something humans are innately do, or is hating culturally learned?
Right. Emotions are not fundamental any more than thoughts are fundamental. They are, in many respects, both epiphenomena. They're both driven by something that is more hidden. So when McLuhan talked about the hidden ground, and when McLuhan talked about, remember, McLuhan had no place to go in his psychological analysis.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to go psychoanalysis for many reasons. He certainly didn't want to go behaviorism. So he wound up with Gestalt, and then he wound up with figure and ground and various other formulations from the Gestalt psychologist. So my answer is emotions are figures. just as much as most concepts, something that McLuhan is very insistent on. Concepts are figures, precepts are ground. Now, unfortunately, the whole area of the subconscious had been taken up by 20th century psychologists, I guess starting with Freud's unconscious, that Marshall did not want to go into. And so he winds up with an alternative. And I won't belabor this here now, but it turns out that Marshall was let down by his friends. He was surrounded by people who knew better, but who apparently never clued him in. Marshall's friend and colleague, Walter Ong, he could have given Marshall great advice about what is known as faculty psychology. And he didn't. Bernard Muller-Time, BMT, who helped Marshall write his classical trivium dissertation, I believe, when they were both at, this is all St. Louis. That's where Ong also was. Marshall didn't come along until the 30s and 40s, by which time people had largely forgotten that there was a Catholic faculty psychology, which had spread into many other areas, non-Catholic areas, which dominated Western psychology. I'll underscore here, there is no Eastern psychology. Because there is no individual psyche of the same sort to be studied. But Marshall was sort of left high and dry. And one of the things that we have done at the center, actually the first thing I did when some friends of mine and I started the Center for the Study of Digital Life, which is our mothership. On Mother's Day, we need a mothership. It turns out that the first thing we looked at was to try to retrieve faculty psychology. This is most, I guess, straightforwardly the psychology of St. Thomas Aquinas, who was very important in Marshall McLuhan's life, very important in James Joyce's life, and so forth. And we did it. We accomplished it. We completed the job and published it. So there is a 200 plus page book on the ecology of the inner senses on the digitallife.center website. That's CSDL's website. So the problem,
you mean it's a free book, Mark?
Yeah.
Mark, people can go there and get a PDF or a printout free.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of PDFs and a number of other people that some brand new things and some things which have largely been ignored and which we then republished. But there's very rich material there.
And it's a beautiful site. I was there today, and it's beautifully.
So you go to the journal tab across the top. And we're publishing. We've only published one issue, but there's more coming, I hope. Our journal at the center is called Dia Noeticon. Which is Greek that roughly translates into thinking things through. The dia is throughness. And you'll see a great deal of material there. The net of which is we are simply not going to be able to go on to the next step, whatever the next step is. We can't get to the next step until we understand the human psyche.
That's good.
These artificial intelligence researchers who are trying to build artificial humans have to fail because they don't understand the human.
Let's hold for a second because I want to catch up. Sure. That was really good again. And I want to thank you for enlightening me about the book Joyce, Aquinas, and Aristotle. It's coming to me soon, and it's very important to hear this out. And I'm glad you told me about it because it is a brand new book. And when you distinguished concepts are figure, precepts are ground, what are percepts? Are they figure or ground? Good laugh.
The simple answer is percepts are how we interact with reality. So we have a perceptual system, usually identified with 5 external senses.
Yeah.
Bernie Muller-Time, one of Marshall's mentors, wrote a very important article in the 40s and entitled "The Common Sense, the Perfection of the Senses." Now, you might know the term perfection means effectively for particularly scholars such as this in the Catholic vocabulary. Perfection means completion. And so Bernie's article about the common sense, which is one of the 4 inner senses, one of the 4 faculties that we study in the ecology of inner senses. Marshall read that, and I think he just sort of said, okay, that's done. My mentor has said common sense is the end of the line. It's not. It's just the beginning.
It's just the beginning.
So the sequence here that I would suggest is percepts is how we recognize reality. Precepts are how our subconscious organizes reality for us. And then concepts wind up being the fruit of that whole entire process.
Right.
And if the underlying inner senses are confused, imbalanced, as they always are under electric conditions. And so Joyce and McLuhan are writing to an audience who are deeply confused because the world they're living in is filled with fantasy. So if your precepts are messed up, then your concepts are going to be rationalizations. Your concepts are going to be just a whole bunch of nonsensical, largely useless argumentation.
Yeah. Beautiful, Mark. You again broke that down so clearly. I try to explain to people sometimes, and I'm not a McLuhan or Joyce scholar. I'm a student. I'm trying to learn, but I appreciate you saying that because it gives me inspiration and it makes me feel like I've got to do my homework. And when I talk about sense ratio shifting, like with Joyce, you're in an activity where your eye is the dominant, but it's really he's switching an eye experience into an ear experience because you have to hear Finnegan's Wake, but you also have to be looking at the words. So it is a sense ratio shifting. And in describing sense ratio shifting, I sometimes ask this question: what human activity happens where all 5 senses are pretty much equally in use or equally active, so that sense ratio shifting isn't,
I'll make 2 comments here. First of all, Marshall McLuhan was 100% correct that we have to be concerned about sense balances and their shift.
Yeah.
The second statement is he was looking at the wrong senses. As important as the shift from the eye to the ear, which is to say from print eye to acoustic space and electric media environments, that's all correct, but it's not the most important part.
Right.
The most important part of sensory balance shifting is the inner senses, not the outer senses. And unfortunately, because his friends did not clue him in on something that the church had largely abandoned at this point. So the 20th century, the Catholic Church did not consider psychology to be a vital topic. They abandoned that particular conversation. I can give you some reasons. The Jesuits will come into that conversation. But ultimately, the retrieval of Thomas Aquinas, which was done by Leo XIII in 1891. Actually, no, I'm sorry, 1878. Attorney Patras. 91 was Rerum Novarum. But the retrieval of Thomas Aquinas, done by Leo XIII, in large part because his brother recognized that the church was no longer paying any attention to Aquinas. And he set up his own private school. He was teaching his own private Aquinas school, and then his brother becomes pope, and the brother declares that Aquinas is a common doctor, and we have to do everything according to Aquinas. That shift ran up against a major problem in psychology. And it turns out that Aquinas's faculty of psychology, originating largely in Aristotle, never made it out the door. In particular, the Pope, I don't want to get too far down the history rabbit hole here, but people may not realize that there were very few Catholic universities in the late 19th century. Napoleon had shut them down in France. Italy had seized the Papal Estates. The Italians were not on board. There probably were some important exercises going on in Spain, but largely by the end of the 19th century, as we became modern, the role of the Catholic Church in higher education was enormously diminished. And the Jesuits were responsible for a lot of that. So the Jesuits did not want to bring Aquinas forward. Therefore, the psychology did not come forward. Therefore, it's up to us to remember what Marshall, unfortunately, never learned. And so these five senses and the sensory balance between them is an enormously important idea, absolutely critical idea. And if you shift that focus from the external senses to the internal senses, now you've got something.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going through right now.
Yeah.
The internal sense of imagination has gone wild into fantasy. The internal sense of memory is what computers and digital technology is now elevating.
Mark, let me ask you.
Way back. Bye.
Let me ask you, Mark, if a side question.
I wanted to answer your question.
I'm sorry. When you're done,
What is the activity of humans that probably most?
Yep. What activity?
And the answer to that question is giving birth.
Giving birth, amazing. Yep. Well, you know what I get the most? You want to guess the answers I get the most?
I don't know. LSD? I don't know.
Sex.
Okay.
All five are sort of going.
They're related.
One said, yeah, they're related. One said going to the bathroom, dancing. So it's interesting, but sex is the dominant one. They think all five are working. But did you ever aspire to be a priest?
No.
Wow. Yeah, because I did. My cousin was a priest. I was like, oh, I want to be a priest. So it's interesting how some of this, seems to be you're gathering people to exchange ideas, much like what a priest does. They gather people to talk and commune together, with song, ritual.
You have to remember, I'm sure you do, that following Vatican II, the Roman Catholic Church went through, I suppose I could have, Vatican II is beginning in 1963 when I'm 15 years old.
Yeah.
So that probably would have been about the right time to be considering a priestly vocation.
Yeah.
And the church was completely tossed upside down.
Yeah.
So just given the timing of all of this, it wouldn't have probably worked for me.
Yeah.
But I did actually once upon a time pretend to be interested in becoming a Unitarian minister.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But the reason for that is because it got me a draft deferment.
Gotcha. Good. Okay. So, James, that's yeah. Well, no, I'll tell you really quick. You know how I got out of the draft? In 63, I'm 53. I was born in 53, so I was 10. I got out of the draft because I went to this guy. I was an anti-war person. I went to this guy, and he literally taught me how to brainwash 4 men and convince them I was raised a Catholic not to shoot people.
Really?
And I learned the art of persuasion. I sat in a room with 4 old men.
So
I don't know.
you became a pacifist.
I became what's called a conscientious objector.
Yes, right.
I learned the art of persuasion, and I know the street in Flint, in the house where I would go. And all I remember is this guy, he probably had long hair and sort of a hippie. He taught me how to persuade these people that I was a conscientious objector. I was an altar boy. I was taught never to kill people, whatever. But I'm always amazed that little memory keeps in, like, how did I convince these 4 old men to do that? I don't know how I did that, but something.
My guess is that they were filling a quota and not looking for trouble.
Could have been. There's so many factors involved. So now to James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner says sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Because the subconscious is very purposefully not accessible. And here McLuhan is an excellent guide. It turns out, as McLuhan said to the famous Catholic theologian, Jacques Maritain, I forget, I probably actually said this last week also, but I'll say it again. There is a deep-seated repugnance in the human breast against understanding the processes we're involved with. That would be living life, honestly.
Yeah.
Second sentence. Such an understanding implies far too much responsibility for our actions. So, to actually understand the world in which we live, we are actually wired to avoid.
Wow, we are wired to avoid. So, are we wired to be slackers? Is that what you mean, or is that different?
No, we're just. I mean, to be fair here. All
yeah.
Right, now let me do a brief rant on the topic of democracy.
Yeah.
There's no way anybody in their right mind who thought about this for 10 seconds would say that America is a democracy.
Yeah.
No one would say that.
Yeah.
It turns out that 80% of the total cost of elections, which we all know because we're bombarded with it, is paying for television advertising.
Yeah.
And it's all being paid for by lobbyists and corporations and rich guys.
Yeah.
So the idea that your vote actually matters, as opposed to identifying you as somebody who has drunk the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
Now, there are lots of other democracies, and, we're not going to jump into this in any great length here, but it turns out that there is a principle, a very important principle of governance, part of what's known as Catholic social teaching, known as subsidiarity. And you can go and look it up, and there's a variety of Wikipedias, multiple Wikipedias on the topic, because it's Catholic or it's secular. But it turns out the European Union was formed as a federation based on the Catholic principle of subsidiarity. So this is how federalism is supposed to work. Subsidiarity, simply defined, is decisions are taken at the lowest possible level.
Yeah.
In other words, only people who are actually responsible get to vote. Now, we have no responsibility whatsoever about NATO expansion and invasions in Ukraine. No responsibility at all. And yet we're all being bombarded by it. And some are dying as a result of this. And yet, whose idea was that?
It's a military industrial complex or something. Yeah, whose idea? But is it a plutocracy? If you said we're not a democracy, are we a plutocracy?
The three forms of government on a call. Call you later. The three forms of government, according to Aristotle in his book Politics, are ruled by one, ruled by a group, and a rule by many. He named, and this is actually quite interesting because I've just encountered some people who have apparently quite deliberately gotten this wrong. The rule by one is monarchy.
Okay.
The rule by a group is aristocracy in Aristotle. The rule by many is a republic. Then he goes on to say there are degenerate forms of all three in Aristotle's Politics. Monarchy degenerates into tyranny. Aristocracy degenerates into an oligarchy, which I think is what you mean by plutocracy.
I see.
And a republic degenerates into democracy.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot more in Aristotle's Politics than that. But the net of it is we are not a republic anymore. Civil War probably was the end of that in terms of the American Constitution. We're certainly not a democracy.
Yeah.
But we're somewhere in the degenerate aristocracy world.
Yeah.
But here's the kicker in all this. And McLuhan is enormously helpful in sorting this out, way beyond anything that Aristotle understood, because in Aristotle's day, media was a relatively flat terrain. So we can compare constitutions all day long, but they're all more or less in the same early scribal sort of condition. That's not true. China is radically different. So when China says they have democracy, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And I will just simply suggest that the responsible people are the ones who are making the decisions. And I will guarantee you that the local Communist Party official has no chance if he wants to go against everybody in the village.
Yeah.
He cannot. No, there isn't, yes, China has a big army, they have a big police force and so forth, but if the local Communist Party official goes against what the people in his village are talking about, he's fired.
Yeah.
And so the highest level of Chinese society is elected by the highest level of responsible people.
Yeah.
And in broad brush terms, that's more or less what is known as the Politburo of the Communist Party of China. But these levels are matching responsibility levels. The man on the street in China has no responsibility for diplomacy. China is about to become the force that brings peace to Ukraine. That's what everything is pointing towards at this point. There has not been a spring offensive. We're all halfway through May. We're heading into summer. There's not been a spring offensive. All kinds of stories are coming out about what a bad guy Zelensky is. The most recent stories about Zelensky are coming forward as leaks from the intelligence community to say Zelensky's a madman. He wants to launch missiles on Moscow. This is completely out of control. So Zelensky, who is just riding the the buffalo here, he's an actor and does a pretty good job at doing that. He has no clue about the world. And he now wants to take this conflict to Russia. Now, we know that a few other people in history have attempted to do that. Napoleon comes to mind. Yeah. There's a bunch of others. This is just beyond ignorance.
Yeah.
And he's about to be pushed aside. And the force that will likely do this will be China.
Wow.
And it will be because the highest level of Chinese are responsible or take themselves to be responsible in a good way for the overall world situation. And they're stepping up as they should under subsidiarity to play a major role here. And that's kind of a democracy.
Yeah. Mark, in regards to what you just said, 2 questions. Utah Phillips, folk singer, says, anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people.
Okay.
Who's entitled to make the rules?
Well, since we live in society and very few of us live in caves, the answer is those who are responsible socially for the decisions that are being made make the rules, or should make the rules.
Yeah.
It's not the way it works far too often. But yeah, anarchy is fine if you're floating on a boat in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah.
You know, until the sun kills you or the sharks kill you or something else gets you, but you won't last very long.
What's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
The whole notion of rights is a print phenomenon. And it's very important to recognize here that the 2 media-driven paradigms that you and I and your listeners have probably most considered because they've been overlapping in our lives. The print paradigm originating in the 16th century and the electric paradigm originating in the 19th century. So this is the eye for the ear. This is the balance of the external senses. So McLuhan is talking a lot about how print is overcome by electric. And you also have, obviously, anarchy and a whole bunch of things being proposed in the midst of all this. It is important to remember, to stay on the theme here of China, China never had print or electricity. It never happened there. And print is what brought in this notion of the sovereign individual with rights. That would make no sense under scribal conditions, which is what Chinese still are today. It makes no sense under digital conditions. So rights is an anomaly. Individual rights is not the way society, through the bulk of human history, has ever been organized. It's a Western print anomaly. Responsibilities, on the other hand, all societies have had to wrestle with that sort of question, and there are many answers that people come up with. But I would consider the notion of rights, as it is normally considered, to be a print-based detour into the weeds. That doesn't mean there isn't a large topic of natural rights. And I'm quite confident it's been a debate going on aggressively throughout all of this, but natural law is coming back. So I've had this conversation with a number of friends who are lawyers, and they've each told me how when they went to law school, sometime early in law school, they were told there are no natural laws.
Wow.
That all laws are man-made, and get over this whole idea that there's anything natural about the law. That's the kind of people who are now running the U.S. government.
Mark, it's so amazing how we're returning to the Jimi Hendrix line at the beginning. I want to know about the new mother nature, and it's all nature, natural law, this nature, and then the Bateson conscious person purpose versus nature. Okay, let's go. That was good. I really appreciate what you just said there, but let's go into a screenwriting, because you said print. A screenwriting teacher told me great film, great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention. I love you start laughing because you know where my question's going. You're so smart. You're like, what role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing your essay, or you're a writer? What role does
I basically have made my career by writing, but writing about things that most people literally can't see. And so I know better now that I've been through this entire research on faculty psychology, but I know that the hidden ground, as McLuhan described it, is what all art is attempting to force to the surface, force into some kind of recognition. And so I'm relatively aware when I write, particularly if I'm writing about something which other people have not written about, which is a lot of what I do, that what I'm really doing is I'm inviting the reader's subconscious to connect their own dots, not the dots that I was providing to them. So I'm more with Stanley on this question. I actually once upon a time wrote the only movie review I've ever written in my life, and I wrote it under a pseudonym. Not quite sure why I did that. But it was about Kubrick's movie Eyes Wide Shut. And I think the title might have been something like Ears Wide Open or something like that. It was a riff on McLuhan. And it turns out I figured out the password to the orgy, which was Fidelio. And I figured out where this all came from. And at one point in my life, I collected audio tape recorders. And I had a massive number of them because of eBay. Everybody was getting rid of the old machines and going digital. So I had magnetic tape recorders. And at one point, I actually owned the audio tape recorder used to record Eyes Wide Shut in England.
Wow.
So I did a little bit of studying on Kubrick. I'm more with Kubrick on that. I'm going to tweak your subconscious with my art. I'm not going to tell you why I did it. I'm not going to get into any of these intention sort of discussions. And it really doesn't matter because it's your subconscious that's being tweaked. So you make the connections. You use your subconscious to construct the form of what I'm trying to do. The day the music died, the artist was smart enough to copyright it, and he pulls in millions and millions of dollars every year because he copyrighted the day the music died. But I saw an interview with him just the other day, Don McLean. And he said, no, I will never talk about the meaning of the lyrics. It's up to you. You connect the dots.
Let's do a quick tangent. The story goes, Playboy interview Kubrick, why'd you make 2001? To convolate McLuhan. That's what he said. It's in print. And
convolate?
Well, convolute. Twist.
Okay.
Twist it. I mean, Yeah, twist it.
He wanted to get McLuhan's attention. So yes.
Yeah. So he wanted to twist the medium as a message. He's basically says to convolate McLuhan. And that's okay. So then Stanley invited Marshall to a pre-release screening. The story goes Marshall fell asleep after 10 minutes. And then Eric sort of expound on it more. Do you know anything more? Did Marshall wake back
Eric
up?
was the only person who would have had any of those details for me. And I actually heard that he fell asleep right away in that Wagnerian thus spake Zarathustra. It wasn't actually Wagner, but anyway, yeah.
But it's like, hey, that's Harry Smith. He said the purpose of cinema is to put you to sleep, and he got that from Bruno. So it goes very deep, but it's like he was doing what you just said, to invite the reader's subconscious to connect their own dots. So Marshall had fucking epiphanies while he was sleeping during. It was like I saw a Bucky Fuller lecture once, and it was the best nap I ever took in my life. But Duchamp says there's no art without an audience.
Bucky was famous, by the way, for Bucky was quite a character. Bucky, tried to commit suicide.
I didn't.
By jumping into Lake Michigan. Everything had failed. He was trying to build modular housing.
Yeah.
The business was going belly up.
Yeah.
All kinds of problems. And so he was in Chicago, went to Lake Michigan and got up on some high thing and prepared to throw himself into the lake and drown himself. And he claimed that instead what happened is the aliens captured him.
Oh my God.
This has actually been published, and the Fuller people know about this because I've had many conversations with them, but they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
He was taken up by the aliens, and the aliens, in addition to probing him or whatever else they do, they implanted in his mind, everything that you say is completely true. So the story that I heard is that Bucky would commonly get up and give lectures, and then take questions from the audience and turn off his hearing aid. So he had no idea what the question was, but he just gave a Bucky Fuller answer.
Yeah. Well, this is this woman. I wish we could just sit down and have
somebody who was involved with the cruises in the Aegean, right? With Marshall and Bucky.
Yeah. Well, no, it was the Bahamas. Yes, that's the same.
Bahamas.
Yeah, the Bahamas. It was Mary Jane Schultz, Bucky, Marshall, and she said one night Bucky talked for 8 hours. Everybody clapped, so he talked for another 8 hours. That's her line. So I like to repeat that because he is known to have spoken long. But Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing?
All the time. And I write differently depending on who the audience is. You have to.
Yeah.
I mean, my career was as a Wall Street analyst. I was talking to senior portfolio managers in technology.
Yeah.
That's a very different audience than what I do now. I've got a Substack now. Exogenous.substack.com. Not just me, with some of my friends, but one of the companies that we've started is Exogenous Inc., and we got a Substack. So anybody who listens to this, just go to exogenous.substack.com, sign up for free.
Yeah, beautiful. I talked with Michael Apted 40 years ago. I said, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? Most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922 in France. But in 1980s, when MTV's starting, it's really prominent to the point where Marty Scorsese says, I cut my films faster because of MTV. Mm-hmm. Michael Apted answered, he says, because we've learned to take in information faster. Can we learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
We talked about information last week. Information is a make-believe word. It has no meaning.
Yeah. The
core of the meaning is a form.
Yeah.
Which, surprisingly, very few people today, if you ask them to describe what is a form, what is formal causality, they would look at you blankly.
Yeah.
They'd be happy to talk about information, but information has a prefix in, and ation as a suffix. So it's
Yeah.
buried. The actual term is form.
Yeah.
So are we able to take in forms more rapidly than we could before? I think that's quite possible, but it's a distorted form. It's not a true form.
Yeah.
And the reason for this goes back to faculty psychology. The
Yeah.
form that we take in from our external perceptions through our common sense, that all winds up being stored in an image bank, if you will. Doesn't have time codes on it, doesn't have dates on it, doesn't have relationships. It has none of that. If you if you imbalance that internal sense and you increase the speed in which forms are being presented to us, you're now demanding that the imagination do work that it is not capable of doing.
Yeah.
The memory component of the internal senses gets diminished as a result of this, because in the memory component, as opposed to the imagination component, in the memory component, we begin to draw relationships. We begin to link things together in time. We form our recognition, not the same as a pattern. Pattern is what computers do, but we recognize forms. And that would be one of the good definitions of what differentiates a human from a robot. Robots are designed to recognize patterns.
Yeah.
Humans recognize forms. They're not the same.
Yeah.
So my answer to your question is we probably do take in forms more rapidly when our internal senses are imbalanced. We're just stuffing everything into that imagination. And that drives fantasy. And a guy like Scorsese knows his audience, so he knows what he has to do.
Yep.
And this is just that rapid intake, rapid cutting that you call information. It's actually distorted forms that are being splattered against our imagination. And we're going to have to end that. That is a big part of the problems that we all sense in our lives. We've overdone the imagination side of this.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because computers don't have any imagination. That's the whole story about AI. So the complaints that computers don't understand anything, that's exactly right. They're not supposed to understand anything.
No.
They obsess over memory. The humans are now going to have to reconstruct our memory. And the implications of that on many fronts, not the least of which is commercial. If you added up the total amount of money spent on fantasy, we got to include makeup. We got to include cosmetic surgery.
Yeah.
We got to include all these media functions. We got to include a whole bunch of activities. My guess is it turns out to be a really surprising, maybe as much as half of today's economy spent on fantasy.
Yeah.
If I'm right, if we're right, that we're shifting from fantasy to memory, I'm not saying it'll be the same size, but I'm saying there will be a commensurate commercial shift from fantasy to memory. And I'm too old to start a company to do this, but
but you're not too old to
a bunch of kids out there.
Yeah, but you're not too old to articulate it perfectly. Is it literally possible to multitask?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. I mean, the answer to the question is our cerebral cortex has a very strange structure. We will never find a thought. There's no such thing as a thought. So if multitasking, which typically means sort of thinking about multiple things at the same time, if that's what you mean by this, we can think about a lot of things at the same time. We can engage in activities that require different aspects. We have trillions of neurons, to direct at these sorts of topics. But I'm not sure I've captured the correct meaning of multitasking.
Mark, this is a good lead into a question I never asked, but it came up today on CBS Sunday Morning. There's a 3-minute news spot on the kid who's in the school bus. The bus driver has an attack, falls out. He jumps out of his seat and he knows what to do, grab the wheel, hit the brake, and he saved all the kids from the bus crashing and killing. And then they made
needless to say, that happened subconsciously for that kid. There was no more reason for that kid to have a debate with himself and rationalize the situation any more than a tennis player has to have a debate about where to hit the ball.
No, when you see his last in the news item it's not hard news. It's sort of light news, but they're trying to make a point. He was not on a cell phone because his parents won't let him have a cell phone. And everybody else in the bus was on cell phones with ear pods.
Right.
And they used the word that I loved, situational awareness. So I learned that TSA, tactile situational awareness, can be compared to what kids are going through and what that explains them. When you're in a jet bomber and your plane's bomb, tactile situation awareness, TSA, means you don't have time to look at all the gauges. You just kind of look at everything and make decisions to try to save yourself.
A brief story I have on that is I knew a guy who was actually hired by the U.S. Air Force to solve the problem of getting the attention of a fighter pilot when a missile was heading for their tailpipe.
Yeah.
And you might guess, it's very McLuhan, the answer that they came up with. They have a child's voice in their ear whispering to them, "You're about to die. A missile is coming up your back." And that turned out to be the only way to get their attention.
Got their attention. But the question I really had, that's beautiful. You said that. It taught me that what I learned was that now kids are on so many multiple screens in so many things, multitasking or whatever you want to say. They're not, we would listen to a transistor radio, but we weren't generally, maybe we were looking at a comic book too, but we weren't maybe overloaded in sensory overload as much. And what kids are now, there's so much sensory overload because they don't identify with one thing, they get a bigger picture view.
Well, remember, social media is not digital. Social media is television.
Yeah.
So what you just described to me are kids who are struggling to watch multiple TV channels at the same time.
Yeah.
In general, set-top boxes, at least in the U.S., maybe not elsewhere, will allow you to only have 2 channels. And I must tell you that rarely when I watch television, I'm going back and forth all the time. One television channel is no longer entertaining enough.
Yeah.
So my comment on that supposed sensory overload is that in fact we're to put it in McLuhan tetrad terms, the television has flipped and it just doesn't work anymore. It's not.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah.
In terms of our attention, and so we wind up looking at multiple shows at the same time.
Yeah.
Multiple news programs, multiple whatevers. Part of the reason, honestly, why I do that, and I would imagine it factors into some of the rest of this, is I refuse to watch a commercial.
Yeah.
Commercials should be recognized as sophisticated, deliberate brainwashing.
Yeah.
And if you allow the population to be brainwashed that way, we can have that debate. But I don't know if you noticed that another guy from the McLuhan orbit recently died.
Who's that?
Let's see.
Jerry Manders.
Jerry Manders, correct.
Yes.
I think it's a singular, Jerry Mander.
Gerrymandering, 4 reasons to eliminate TB. Exactly. I was like, I don't want to eliminate TB. I want to study how it affects us. But then because of his obituary, never mentioning Marshall, we knew he sat at Marshall's feet and got everything he knew from Marshall. But they talked about Howard Gossage, which we could do hours on Howard Gossage. You know, but it was very interesting. I heard
who lives in a converted firehouse.
There you go. You. But anyway, what were you going to say about Jerry? Because I actually went into a little rabbit hole and heard him speak, and he was pretty intelligent. But go ahead. Yeah.
No, it was just and I'm agreeing with you that the goal in our lives is not to mandate by regulation the elimination of something or other. You and I can personally decide whether we want to or not want to watch a commercial. I don't want to.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason why I'm always changing channels. And in fact, I sometimes juggle 3 or 4 channels, but television, in terms of sitting down and watching a program all the way through and listening to the commercials, nobody does that anymore.
Yeah. What was the motive of the cave artist?
Well, the cave artist is in an oral paradigm. So they have no self-awareness. And so the question you're asking is whether it is even appropriate to describe the work of someone who has no subconscious, because you can't have a subconscious unless you have a conscious. And the cave artist did not have a conscious. Did they have a subconscious? I don't think so. So the structure of the oral 40,000 years ago, caves of Lascaux in France and other places, their mentality is so different from ours that I think the word intentions probably doesn't even work.
Wow. That's very interesting.
They're expressing an oral, pre-literate, pre-conscious mind.
Yeah.
And my guess is that they were also high at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And since most of this is done by spitting ink or colored chalk through your fingers, there's probably a whole bunch of other odd psychophysical things going on with the person who's doing that, because the breath is involved and the hands are involved, and so this is a phenomenon that deserves to be treated, but not as art. So many people, as I recall, a McLuhan scholar, Robert Logan, began their writing career describing that as art, without recognizing these distinctions. And I think that, as I have been doing throughout these interviews, my answer would be, that ain't art. He's my brother.
Mark, it's Marshall's favorite line. The Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can.
Right.
It is a great line. It's like Paul Schrader, who wrote Taxi Driver. He said, the role of the artist is to attempt to sell out, but fail.
Right? Exactly.
That's so bullshitty, because most artists love that, because they go, I'm so pure and authentic. Even if I try to sell out, I fail. So it proves I'm being pure.
Right. So now we're into the realm of rationalization, which is in the concept realm, which is not subconscious. And so we can match this with McLuhan's statements about how all humor is based on grievance.
Oh, yeah.
And grievance is a subconscious phenomenon.
Yeah.
Not a conscious one.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's really good. And Two of my film heroes, George Manupelli, his mantra is ignore yourself. Jonas Mika says there is no self-expression, and Cecil Taylor, jazz pianist, says I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Yeah. So post-cave, is art making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technologies, environments, and
remember
and are dominant?
Yeah, remember this whole notion of the sense is a new one.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're of self, rather.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So if you're focused on the self, then you're off on the Western detour of print and electric. Not so much electric change things around even further, but you're on a POB, your print-oriented bastard sort of approach to these sorts of things. So it's not surprising, particularly for a jazz artist. But the other famous statement, which of course came from Ezra Pound, the artist is the antenna of the rays, which is a version that just comes through me. So what's happening, I think, most often in those cases, is that somebody's subconscious, which is not their self, self is a conscious construct, their subconscious is receiving signals in this antenna analogy, and then broadcasting them.
Can art be egoless? Can art making be egoless?
I don't think so. I don't think so. But as was always with these things, it depends on what you mean. If what you're referring to is what Freud called the ego, the answer, of course, is yes. But the problem here is that Freud is one of those very important figures who was basically lying his way through life. And he deserves probably a lot of the reputation he has as a result. Nowadays, the reputation of Freud is that none of this was based on any experiments. He just made it up and then tried to crib it into his notes. But I will give the readers a diagnosis of Freud, which is where we get the term free ego. Ego is the last formulation. I mean, there are other egos, but the ego that most of us think of is the Freudian ego. And the Freudian ego was his very last attempt to structure the human mind. Ego, id, and super ego. By this time, he's basically retired. He's done with building psychoanalysis. He's done whatever he's going to do. And now he comes back with another formulation. Well, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And my answer to that you will find unusual. Who taught Sigmund Freud psychology? And when you ask that question to a Freud scholar, they're going to say, oh, he just figured it out.
Yeah.
Not true at all. Not even remotely true. Freud was not a self-generating genius on these matters.
Yeah.
He was taught as an undergraduate at the University of Vienna by Franz Brentano, a Dominican priest, who taught him faculty psychology from Thomas Aquinas. That's an undergraduate.
How do you spell Franz's last name?
Brentano, Brentano. Brentano.
But the Freudians won't admit that? They know it, don't they?
They even know it.
Wow.
It turns out that there's a multi-volume Jones biography and all kinds of people have written things, but there's a whole lot about Freud, particularly early Freud, for which there's either no documentation or no appetite to look into it.
And that's faculty.
Most modern Freudians, and you can still find Freudian psychoanalysts, but they're far more interested in their clinical analytical practices. You can find some Freud scholars. They have other axes to grind. I have literally asked the question of a dozen Freud scholars who taught Freud psychology, and not a single one of them had an answer.
And they don't, you mean Aquinas spawned faculty psychology and Brentano taught Freud that. Yeah, amazing. Okay, so on what occasion?
Aquinas was a Dominican. So the specifics here are that faculty psychology from Thomas Aquinas was not universally agreed to within the church, and in particular, the Jesuits took lots of umbrage with it, which is why it didn't survive.
Yeah.
But the Dominicans tried to keep it alive. So in the middle of the 19th century, a Dominican priest, Fra Sprantano, until he left the church and wasn't a priest anymore, but he was teaching Aquinas in the mid 19th century, and Freud was a student.
Amazing. Okay, here's Marcel Proust's question. Mark, on what occasion do you lie?
Well, lying implies that you have a grasp of the truth that you are somehow trying to disguise. Obviously, in any personal, intimate relationship, there must be a whole lot of that going on. Lying is a conscious expression. I think we all lie a great deal because we don't really have access to our subconscious, so we don't really know what we're thinking. But I would say that the most common instance in my life for lying, probably in most people's lives for lying, is what you say to your wife or your husband, or your kids, because there's a purpose and responsibility that is more important than quote telling the truth.
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
What's most important is diagnosis and dialogue.
Very good. Reword those questions. Diagnosis and dialogue.
Yes.
Yes.
The fact that I don't argue with anybody does not mean that I am just going to compromise on everything.
Yeah.
No, I have a diagnosis of the world. I'll explain that to you in as much detail as you'd like. I'm not going to compel you to agree with me. I'm hoping it helps you connect some dots subconsciously, but no need to argue about it.
Yeah.
And then we'll discuss it. Then we'll have a dialogue about it.
Yeah.
The problem is that in our times is that there is a controlled narrative. And so therefore dialogue, and that narrative does not include diagnosis. It's filled with lies. And so we now have a quite remarkable political situation where most likely Biden will avoid debates. There won't be Democratic Party debates. His primary challenger will be RFK Jr., who will spend the entire campaign describing how Biden is lying. And then you're going to have Donald Trump and the whole circus on the other side. So the net of all this is we have become more and more annoyed at the fact that there's no serious conviction. Lies are all over the place. Compromises are impossible. We're at an impasse.
Yeah.
And so my recommendation for helping us move out of that is let's prioritize diagnosis over conviction, and let's prioritize dialogue over compromise.
So well put, Mark. I'm curious if you ever met Walter Boart, the author of Operation Mind Control. Did you ever meet him?
Never met the man, no.
But
I've read the book. I've read the book. And the book was important. Surrounding materials.
Yeah. And it's funny because I forgot to mention it's also his birthday today. Oh, but when I asked him what's more important, conviction or compromise, he says the conviction to compromise. And one of my other favorite answers was, the guy goes, depends on what you mean by important. So I love how you rearranged it and took it beyond. You're doing what I talked about at the beginning. You're tertium quid. alchemists. You take two known things, put them together, and come up with a third unknown thing. Go beyond that. So you've accomplished a lot in your life. How do you rate these three elements: luck, skill, and ambition? What played the biggest role, second and third?
Oh, I have absolutely no doubt that luck is the most important of those three.
Wow.
No doubt whatsoever. I've described for my children and for others, if you will, an inheritance, which says if you wish to be successful, you need only two things: good looks and good timing. I would consider both good looks and good timing to be in the luck category.
Yeah. That's Gary Player, the golfer. The more you practice, the luckier you get. T.S. Eliot said poetry's outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
I was taught Babylonian. I wrote Babylonian and cuneiform. My father taught me when I was 8. I think my inner dialogue is much earlier. It's probably some dead language. My father he was a historian of ancient mathematics. And while my greatest contribution probably came from my mother, I learned a great deal from my father and probably act more like him than I should. But my father learned 17 dead languages in order to do the mathematics. I learned 17 extinct computer programming languages as my analogous achievement. But I suspect that my inner dialogue is, even though I could not do this consciously, but I suspect my inner dialogue could be in Latin. I'm not quite sure.
Oh my God. Well, I like what you said about your dad. I maybe learned more than I should have from him, because when I found my female peers at age 50 saying, I'm turning into my mother and fretting it, I found my male peers weren't saying that. And most of us are raised more by our mother than our dad. And Oscar Wilde said, women fret becoming their mothers, men don't, and that's their problem. But what does that mean? More than I should becoming my dad. What did that mean?
Well, my father wasn't that healthy. My father was had mental issues. He had drinking issues, and his mentors were cut down early in his life, and so he was an unhappy man.
I see.
I'm not an unhappy man, but maybe I learned too much in that area too.
That's Zappa said, don't do speed, it will turn you into your parents. And I always say, you don't have a choice. You're going to turn into your parents no matter what. And it's like, if your dad was this and failed there, you absorb him and go, I'm not going to do that. Or it's in your DNA and you're going to become an alcoholic because he was an alcoholic. So it's some combination. We become our parents pretty much.
Oh, I mean, yeah. Well, yeah. This is the Piaget story. So John Piaget,
yeah.
And many people object to this, and probably for good reason, because he was being dogmatic in some sense. I haven't actually read Piaget in a while, so maybe he was tempering it better. But when he said that basically our primary understanding of the world happens in a phase that he called concrete operational. This overlaps what we used to call grammar school. It is basically the period before puberty.
Yeah.
So puberty obviously prepares us for reproduction, but so everything goes nuts under those circumstances. And then we'll come back to it. But another friend of mine says by the age of 12, most of us, our cake is already baked and it's sitting on a shelf cooling.
Yeah.
So I have a real problem with people who profess that they can do something or other to an older person.
Yeah.
That you might be able to realign somebody on the person they were when they were 12.
Yeah.
But you're not going to make somebody new out of all of this. That work's already been done.
Well, dude, you really nailed it, because that's the age I asked this question, and it comes on the next page, but I have to ask it now to make it sound like we're linear with these flowing thoughts. If you met yourself as a 12-year-old today,
All right,
on the street, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
I'm going to give a surprising answer.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell them to study the topic of one-hand clapping.
Oh, wow.
The parentheses after that is, don't let anybody tell you that masturbation isn't fun.
So you mean the clap, one hand clapping is the Buddhism theology you eventually studied? Is that, what does one hand clapping mean?
One hand clapping has come to us in Zen, as a paradox, but there are many possible answers. The most obvious answer is masturbation.
Yeah.
The second most obvious answer is punching somebody.
Oh, I see.
The third most obvious answer is literally one hand clapping.
Is literally, you can do it. That was
You can do it. Nowadays, people do this. They snap their fingers.
Yeah.
In order, yeah. No, they do this. It makes no noise.
Oh, no noise. I see.
Noise. This is a standard way that you applaud somebody in many settings nowadays.
Oh, so you don't. Yeah, I got you.
So you're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That punching somebody reminds me of the great line. Is this a private fight, or can anyone join in? Right. McLuhan probed Finnegan's Wake by Joyce, saying artists dream awake. It sounds elitist, but let's say people create these amazing scenarios in the night while they're sleeping. And artists do it while they're awake. Have dreams played a role in your creative process?
It turns out that I have somehow figured out how to make, I guess you'd say, creative use of a half awake, half asleep sort of state. I would not call it a dream state.
Is it lucid dreaming?
It's not lucid dreaming. It's not a dream state, but it is, as best I understand the terms, hypnagogic.
Oh yeah, hypnagogic.
So I'm sort of in a hypnotic state, but I can problem solve and I can write essays in my sleep.
Wow. Did you study?
Which I guess means I'm not an artist, I guess.
Well, no, I would say you're a high artist. But did you study Milton Erickson at all?
I know of Erickson and I have read his stuff, but the answer is I never participated in any of that. No.
How about NLP?
Again, I know of it. I've known people involved with it, but I never participated.
Yeah. Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
I don't tend to categorize things that way, but my guess is that much of what I believe is, quote, impossible.
Sunra said in New Yorker magazine, the impossible attracts me because everything possible has been done and the world didn't change. Mark, tell me one major thing in your Markness that's changed, and one major thing that stayed the same in the years you've been doing this.
I'm a much better Catholic now than I used to be.
What does
So
that
when I say
mean?
the same is that I was a Catholic.
Yeah.
I still am a Catholic, but I'm a much better one now.
What does that mean to be a better Catholic? How would you describe it?
It means to well, it means to have a much deeper subconscious sense of what's going on and a recognition of the importance of the transcendent.
Yeah.
In a deeper way.
Yeah.
It does not mean going to church every day.
Let's do two things. Did you ever do you recommend The Medium and the Light as a book to read? Marshall's collection. That does capture Marshall's essays on Catholicism and religion good, you would say?
I actually think not.
Yeah.
And as I recall, Eric, who put that together, was operating under some constraints.
Yeah.
And I believe that he thought that it could be done better and had a second volume prepared.
Wow.
But I might be wrong, but I think Andrew might have mentioned this second volume somewhere.
But you would say if basically we say there's 22.
The problem with it is
Yeah.
that it doesn't give enough exposure to the essays that Marshall wrote for Renaissance.
Yeah.
Marshall had a very concerted public Catholic audience.
Yeah.
And he used this Marquette publication, Renaissance, and that isn't given enough material.
Yeah. What's your take on Bob's line that Marshall converted to Catholicism as a performance art piece?
Bob Dean knows absolutely nothing about Marshall McLuhan.
But I mean, that aside, what's your take on that line? Because I think it's funny. Let's just say he didn't say
there was a time when Bob's library, when Carolyn had kicked the books out of Bob's apartment in New York, and I took them in.
Oh,
so I had Bob's library and lived with it, and I can tell you, he thought the Encyclopedia Britannica was worthwhile. I can tell you, he had no clue, and he and I have discussed this. He had zero understanding of Catholicism when he wasn't ranting and raving, saying, "I'm the real Catholic." So, no.
Okay, let's go to
Marshall McLuhan was inspired by many important things.
Yeah,
and he joined the Roman Catholic Church, converted at the age of 24. So that's a fairly important age as we all go through that time period.
Oh, he converted at age 24.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. If you just count the years, it looks like he was 25, but he hadn't had his 25th birthday yet. So he's still 24. But as the story goes, he had come to the conclusion that either the Catholic Church was true, correct, or the biggest fraud ever perpetrated. And the story that I've heard is he actually asked for a sign, preferably from the Virgin Mary. And the way the story is told, he got that sign. So his conversion had nothing whatsoever to do with performance, which Bob should know. I would say that Marshall McLuhan got frustrated on many levels, and the performative Marshall McLuhan, which really begins with understanding media, was a result of failure to get the church or pretty much anybody else to pay attention to him. So this is, he's This is 30 years later.
Yeah.
He becomes a performer out of frustration. That has very little to do with his conversion.
Yeah. Okay, you brought up this word. Very, very well put, Mark. You're so articulate, and you don't talk. And what happens in the McLuhan world for me, they talk in these academic terms.
Yeah.
And you talk on ground level. You're deep, but you're not talking over. You're not talking down to me, and you're not my friends who will listen to this. They'll go, the guy's on the level. You feel like you're just okay. What you said, that word transcendence. What does that mean to you?
That means that human beings are distinguished from other animals, certainly from machines, because of our inherent, hardwired, formal recognition that there's something more than us.
Yes. There is something more than us. That's two things. More, what does something more than us mean? In what regard does that mean?
Well, I guess the most obvious way to think about this is we don't have direct perception. We don't just immediately absorb the reality around us. We have to do some work.
Yeah.
And in doing that work, our subconscious and conscious recognizes that there's a whole lot that we'll never get to. We'll never actually, given the way we are composed.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we cannot avoid doing it. So a friend of mine who at one point was a aggressive atheist, and now actually doesn't like the fact that he performed that way. His version of this is there's just no way around it. Human beings have a God-shaped hole in their head. If we're not human, then no problem. We're a human. We got to fill that.
We got to fill that. That's, Phil Lesh and Zappa's favorite book is Theodore Sturgeon's More Than Human.
Okay.
Okay, so Moshe Feldenkrais,
50s science fiction writer.
Sturgeon, yes.
I probably read Sturgeon at one point.
Yeah, no, I'm always curious. People tell me what about that book is so important. But anyways, here's Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
I'm not sure, but I think it probably has to do with the being an outsider who then managed to have a pretty elaborated social life. I did not turn out to be a loner, or by some accounts, a loser.
Yeah.
I socially integrated. I used my talents to socially integrate.
Did you get that from the way your parents raised you, or on your own?
I probably got my outsider character from my father, but my learning how to socialize that from my mother. So both.
Yeah. What's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
Well, there's no way that physical can be put aside.
Very good. That's it.
Questions that just doesn't work. I mean, I studied genetics. X and XY wind up with some. I'm not going to give you my theories about sexual anatomy, but it's a rather fundamental matter. Cannot be
Yeah.
just fought away. Not possible. I'm a biologist. When asked to write a obit, or not an obit, yeah, an obit. When I asked to write an obit, he was a biologist. When I'm asked to write a resume or a brief description, I always say Mark Stahlman is a biologist.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's beautiful. And the next question is, thank you for that on that question. Very good. And I could tell you, you know what I get 80% of the time, men are linear and women are emotional. And then you say, why do women live longer than men? But the next question really is,
because men are stupider is the reason why women live longer.
But that's
they put themselves in harm's way all the time.
Yeah,
you get these YouTube things where somebody's got one ladder going this way, another ladder going that way, so they can get up to the roof. That's pretty dumb.
That's there's a great cliche I love. Women know, men suppose.
Right.
Okay, what caused matriarchy?
Well, causality is a very important topic, as is matriarchy.
Yeah.
I do not believe there has ever been a matriarchy. And in particular, matriarchy, which was a topic which was raised in the middle of the 19th century by a very important character, not very well known, Johann Jakob Bachhoven, who proposed that, in fact, there had been in antiquity matriarchies. He made it up. Anthropology doesn't support it.
Yeah.
But in the middle of the 19th century, in his particular milieu, it was an important thing to say.
Yeah.
But no. Anthropologically, historically, there's never been what he described as a matriarchy. Never happened. Yes, there are interesting, isolated, semi-isolated groups that anthropology has discovered where roles have been reversed, but that's not the way human society works.
You brought up comedy. I'm glad you brought that Steve Allen line that Marshall loved to quote, behind every joke, there's a grievance. I asked my friend who wrote comedy with Robin Williams, can satire be destructive? He says, that's the job of satire. Yeah. And, you know, if me or you do a cartoon in a certain country and they kill us because we did a cartoon, some people think dying is destructive. Swift compared satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own. Zappa's saying, watch the Nazis run your town. Now go home and check yourself. You think we're singing about somebody else. What's the function of satire?
Well, satire is a grievance-driven, subconscious assault on normal everyday life, consensus life. And that's probably why Eric McLuhan, one half of his PhD is called cynic satire. Yeah.
But what's the function of it? Why do people use satire? I mean, you know, what does it do? Or maybe what's the function of it?
The answer to all these what does it do questions
is
it depends on what the circumstances are.
Yeah. Okay.
And how good you are at it, so that there's no general purpose answer.
Yeah.
But in a situation like the one we're in now, because we're in a paradigm shift now.
Yeah.
We're going from the modern, which is much of the people that you've talked about and worked with and so forth. And Zappa's an interesting character as kind of an anti-modern, but nonetheless, his fascination with Varese and the rest of this modern composition.
Yeah.
Zappa was ultimately a modern man.
Yeah.
With, various anarchistic objections along the way. Well, we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
So now that we're digital, I will take your question and consider it. And so the question now becomes, so what is digital satire trying to do to television?
Right.
Because that's where we're caught right now.
What's the function of laughter?
My guess is it's to increase the oxygen in the blood supply.
Yeah. Gurdjieff said laughter is the reconciliation of yes and no. Gurdjieff. Okay. You create.
I have been recruited by exactly one occult group.
Gurdjieffians?
Yes.
And what happened? Did you try it?
No. They figured out that I wasn't going to swallow the Kool-Aid. They figured out that I was too smart to be a Gurdjieffian.
It's a good title for your book, dude. There's a line, Mark, that goes, "You create what you resist." Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into "You are what you hate." James Joyce said, "It's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve." And Louis Buñuel said, "Thank God I'm an atheist." So any comment, Mark?
But of course, he wasn't. He was French.
Oh, Buñuel and Zappa would be nothing without their religion. Well, this is the whole point of the question. What do you think of this?
Remember all these postmodernists were baptized Catholics.
Yeah.
All of them.
Yeah.
But Jacques Lacan, his brother is a monk.
Yeah.
Heidegger got married by a priest.
Yeah.
So yes, we went on a detour.
Yeah.
The secular world, which is now rearview mirrored,
yeah,
was a detour.
Yeah.
So we just got to get honest about it now.
Yeah, get honest. That's good. But that line, "You create what you resist." I'm not saying you, Mark, but one creates what one resists.
Yeah.
Your comment on that thought.
Well, what you're creating, if it is creative, tends to align with the paradigm, which is, in McLuhan terms, underground, invisible ground.
Yeah.
So that the creative process is invisible ground, and we spend our lives resisting the invisible ground.
Yeah.
It's the whole figure ground story. So depending on where you attach figure and so forth in this, we are, as I mentioned before, we are fighting with ourselves all the time to not take responsibility for the world.
Yeah. Yeah, that Jacques letter, that's a key to your whole thing. That Jacques Martin, is it? How do you say it? Maritain.
Maritain.
Yeah.
Probably the most significant Catholic theologian, active in geopolitics, a lot of other things in the 20th century. And he came, the most important thing for Marshall McLuhan after his conversion,
yeah,
which had nothing to do with performance, was the recognition that this was not going where he thought it was going.
Yeah.
And Vatican II. So by the time you get to the 60s, McLuhan he hasn't left the church, but he probably could easily have said, as many others did, "Church left me."
Yeah.
And so that was the Maritain correspondence.
And that's in the letters of Marshall McLuhan, the book.
May 1969.
May 69. Very good. Thank you. How do you find peace of mind?
I am available on the internet from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday. I'm old-fashioned. It's a job. I usually do not read emails in the evenings or on the weekends. So I spend about less than half of my time doing this sort of stuff, and more than half of my time not doing this sort of stuff.
Beautiful. 5 quick Alan Watts questions just off the top of your head, Mark, in a couple words. Number 1, who started it all?
Billy Joel.
Are we going to make it?
We have already made it.
Where do we put it?
Where the sun doesn't shine.
Yeah. Who's cleaning it up?
The characters who played the cleaners on the television show Charmed, the Charmed ones.
Nice.
The cleaners clean it up.
5. Is it serious?
We all know somebody named Are You Serious?
Yeah.
And so the answer is, of course, no, it's not serious.
It's not. Yeah, that's Zappa said, I'm very serious about being not serious. Couple more and we're out of here, Mark. Amazing. Thank you so much. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Oh, it's got to be over.
Yeah. You already answered this by the way I implied. If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
He was just ahead of his time.
They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell?
I would go with honey.
Nice. If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
I think that I could stand a statue somewhere on the outskirts of Rome, looking off in a distance, naked like David, but instead of David facing from Florence to Rome, I'd be facing from Rome to Florence.
That's good. But what would it be made of?
Oh, it's got to be marble.
Marble. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Well, I'm tempted to say peace.
Oh, that's an amazing answer. I never get that. You know the answer I get the most? The 3? Fame, money, and heroin.
Well, it turns out that earlier in my life, I figured out that there are 3 primary drives.
Yeah.
Fame, money, and power.
Yeah.
And there are blends between them. But where the sweet spot exists is in none of those corners, but in the center.
That's it. We talked about that chewy caramel center in the first part. But I'm there's this article that New York Times printed in December 13th, 2017. It was the TV Critic. And I'm going to read you a couple lines from it because you really brought this up. The cable news business model, conflict means urgency, and urgency means viewers glued to the channel. It is a machine designed to generate stress and negative emotion. Humankind's most productive state is fighting. That's the fight or flight response to be savored or cultivated. So it kind of like is, I would read this to people and I go, what is humankind's most productive state? Is conflict? Like you said, I don't want, I tell me something good you never had.
The answer to that question is that is a very Western television way of looking at things.
Yeah.
Fortunately, not everybody looks at it like it's cable television.
Yeah.
And more people are figuring out that they got suckered into becoming cable television on social media.
Yeah.
So this, I don't like Facebook anymore, and I'm not going to do that anymore. And maybe I'm not going to sign on to any of these things. We're getting over it.
But is conflict the human condition? The question really is, what is the human condition?
No, human condition is to try to reach some resolution about self-transcendence. That's the human condition.
Yeah, to self-transcendence. That's good.
And we often make the mistake and pretend that we're gods.
Yeah.
That's probably the most common error
But was reaching self-transcendent what you said? Tell me something good you never had and you never want. You said peace. You mean you want to strive to get peace? Is that self-transcendence? But you'll never get it. Okay.
No. I'm still working on the self-transcendence part of this, but a significant part of the reason why we do not have peace is because there's a bunch of jerks running around who think they've transcended themselves.
Right. You weren't talking about a self.
This gets very much in the way of peace. Yeah.
You weren't talking about a self-inner peace. You were talking about peace.
Yes, I was actually mimicking Sandra Bullock, who got up on the beauty contest. It was Miss Congeniality contest. When it came to be her turn, after a whole series of women portraying bimbos, came to be her turn. They had all said, the question was, what will you do when you're elected, Miss Congeniality?
Yeah.
And the answer was, I would spend all my time trying to achieve world peace.
Yeah.
And one after another. And it came to her and she said, no, I think what I would do is I would make sure that there was longer jail sentences for parole violators. And then she looked around and she said, and world peace.
You on your first day.
Yeah. What would I do on my first day? What?
Yeah. If you were ruler of the world, what would you do on your first day?
I would give everybody a plum.
That is nice.
Plums for everyone.
If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Well, under those circumstances, there's nothing to do but thank the person for it and return the favor.
That is great. Really gracious of you. Now, Mark, my favorite answer to that, a woman on the Venice Boardwalk said, I would take the bag of shit coming at me and use it to swoop my way out of the vat of vomit. And I said, do you know that is descent into the maelstrom? And it was just amazing. It really, she did, without knowing it, she did. Right. And this is like a major thing. You talked about, avoiding.
So what was that chest the sailor grabbed a hold of that McLuhan found so interesting? It was not a bag of shit. It was the Catholic Church.
Oh, the chest. You mean the broken wooden part?
No, there was a chest that was floating to the top because the air was trapped inside, and that's how the sailor escaped. He was noticing that things rose to the top. The way the story is written, he's looking around, thinking it's all over, but then he's noticing that some things actually rise to the top, and he grabbed a hold of one.
And you mean Marshall said that, or is that your metaphor? Did he say that?
Marshall had a lot to say about the maelstrom, but he never talked Catholic to a public audience.
Right.
So I don't know whether Marshall said that or not, but that is my interpretation.
That's an original Mark.
I think so.
But Mark, that's
anywhere.
Say it again.
At least I didn't read it anywhere.
Right. And this is amazing because Marshall says, well, in that intro to Mechanical Bride, he brings it up within the first couple paragraphs, and he says, we're swirling in a sensory overload of advertising. Why don't we use their techniques to educate? Is that what you're saying?
No. Marshall McLuhan was trapped in a television world.
Yeah.
So he had no real alternative than to somehow use that paradigm against itself. And he did a damn good job. But we're not in that paradigm anymore.
So you would say we're swirling. What's it?
Well, we have a whole new paradigm we can take advantage of. We know an enormous amount more about human psychology. We can now promote memory.
Yeah.
If you want to deal with the maelstrom and see what floats to the top, then study some history. Read some Aristotle.
Read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people. That works.
Well, you'll have to be rather careful in doing that.
Well, we do it very carefully, definitely. Okay, Mark, 3 more or 4 more, and we're out of here. This has been amazing. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
We've gone from television, which is fantasy, to digital, which is memory. We're in a situation that McLuhan described where the old medium uses the new medium as its contents. That's social media. We're in a situation where many people around the world, starting with the Chinese, who never went to print, are already taking advantage of all of this. They are teaching their own classics and all the way up and down throughout the society. So I see absolutely no reason to be throw in the towel here.
Yeah.
Like McLuhan, when he was asked, are you an optimist or a pessimist?
Yeah.
Professor McLuhan. As you remember, his answer was neither. I am an apocalypsist.
Yeah. And
plenty of reason for revelation. Nowadays. So the answer is all we have to do is cozy up to revelation.
Yeah.
We'll do fine.
That's beautiful, Mark, because the etymological root of apocalypse is to reveal. That's to be the Toto, the atomic dog, and pull the curtain back. Anthony Burgess wrote 8 books on Joyce and Clockwork Orange. We must now ask some very different questions about the relationship between music and life. What question remains unresolved for you?
How much British intelligence did Anthony Burgess have when he wrote that book?
Did he have? That's good.
I think most of those writers in that time period had some pretty high level connections. And in Burgess's case, it would have been MI6. It would have been the British version of MK Ultra, which is obviously what this was actually writing about, were experiments on human beings that were not then widely known. So it becomes, sensory deprivation and holding eyelids open and so forth. But my guess is that Burgess was clued in on what was being done to people, and that was a big motivator for him in writing Clockwork Orange.
That Ludovico treatment that you just described.
Yeah.
What do you know the roots of that word, the etymology? Because we think it's Luddite and Vico, but it might not be.
I don't know.
Yeah. But I'm saying, what question remains unresolved for you? That quote aside, just for Mark in general. That was really listening closely, Mark. You can't pull any wool over Mark's eyes.
We have made it a motto of our work that digital retrieves the medieval.
Yeah.
Now, I probably dreamed that one day. And the question of whether that really happens or not remains to be seen.
Yeah. Have to call you back. Yeah, Mark, this is really amazing. You're really generous with your time.
Yeah, we need to wrap it up now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Three more really quick. How has this shaped your behavior? This pursuit of you, this lifetime pursuit of you, shaped Mark's behavior?
I'm very careful about who I spend my time with.
Yeah.
I just had a dialogue with a colleague who was working with me, and the colleague said, I'm not really cut out for this sort of stuff. All I want to do is make friends. And my answer is, all I want to do is hang out with interesting people.
Wow.
Interesting people.
I am lucky. Super lucky, Mark. Okay, here's two more and we're out of here. Thornton Wilder, Awakening, 1928. Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 4.5 hours. Record breaking. Blown my mind completely. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
I think that the civilization that I was born into has been dealt a very bad hand, and the moderns really screwed the pooch. And so when I was 16 years old, 1964, I was working with my father. He was a professor by day and a sports car mechanic by night. And it came across the radio that Norbert Wiener had just died in Stockholm. Wiener was my father's mentor. I've never seen him. I had never seen him. He's no longer with us, but I had never seen him cry before. And he turned to me and he said, "So Mark, now it's up to you. You are going to have to complete what Wiener tried."
Wow.
And I had no clue at the age of 16 what that meant. I'm still trying to figure it out, but that's what it means to me.
Beautiful. What gives you the most optimism?
The kids.
Yes.
No doubt about it.
That's the answer I get the most, Mark. It's amazing. The first question is, what's the best thing for a human being? And Wilhelm Reich said, another human being. They asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life, what gives you the most optimism? And he says, other people. It has been incredible spending this time with another person, especially because it's Mark Stahlman. In fact, I have to end with one of my favorite McLuhanisms. Communication of the new is a miracle, but it's not impossible, especially with you, Mark. I learned a lot new, and I'm so forever grateful.
Thank you very much. These now close to 5 hours have been illuminating for me. I appreciate you putting me through the gauntlet of your list of questions, and I hope we continue the dialogue extensively going forward.
Forever and ever, even though I'm hitting the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends. And I mean it, Mark. This has been really one